Welcome to another episode of the Decision Clinic podcast with me, Paul Corden. Today, looking at my notes, I see I'm extremely fortunate. I have an Olympian about to step into the clinic, and I'm intrigued as to know what would have an Olympian come to a decision clinic. One might imagine that Olympians are extremely skilled in making those not even spur of the moment, but millisecond decisions that have them perform, that have them succeed, that have them win, and I guess set them apart from everybody else that's out there that they're competing against. So I imagine that ultra high speed decision making, you might think makes them great at the longer term, more strategic decision making. And that's the topic that we're going to talk about today. So I'm really excited to see what Nick Timmings, my guest at the clinic, has brought to have a conversation about. And we're going to get into it. So, Nick, welcome. Thanks for coming to my clinic. And I don't really know what brings you here, so that's part of the conversation we're going to have today. But I know I like to understand a bit about the person that walks in here, what drives you, and what are you up to? And of course, I know you're an Olympian, and Olympians can look like many different things. So perhaps you could say a bit about what it is like being an Olympian.
Thanks for having me here, Paul. Hopefully I can answer some of the burning questions you have.
Perhaps tell us a bit about your sport. Let's start with your sport and maybe talk it through what you do, but also I'm always interested in how you make decisions. So, in the moment when you're in the middle of it, what's going through your brain, how you're making those extremely fast, super rapid decisions.
Yeah, so the sport I do is a Winter Olympic sport called skeleton. Pretty much we are racing down ice hills. All the tracks are different, but they usually comprise of up to about between 14 and 18 corners. And every single track has a different amount of corners. They go different directions. They're different sizes, different gradients. So yeah, you are absolutely right. We do have to make so many decisions in one single run. And depending on if we're online, if we're offline, we have to change those decisions very rapidly as well. Yeah, there is a lot that goes into it. And sometimes it goes right, sometimes it goes wrong. And we definitely have to learn from that and move forward.
I can imagine sometimes it goes wrong. So when I think about decision making, I always think people get concerned about making the right or the wrong decision. And one of the things I often say is there's not really a right or a wrong decision. There's just the best decision in the moment. But I imagine if there are some dire consequences, the wrong decision could go that way. So, what might some of the consequences? So I don't know anything about skeleton. So you just told me down an ice hill, and the word skeleton tends to suggest to me that you're not in like a bobsleigh. So say a bit more about that. And also what might some of the consequences be of some decisions if you perhaps make the wrong one?
Yeah, so we are on a little sled on our stomachs, and there's no protection or anything. And we can hit walls, we can flip on our backs, we can fly out of corners, all these different things. But I'd say the minor consequences of wrong decisions would just be a slow down time. So not doing as well in the race as you possibly could have. And then, it could be up to crashing severely, injuring yourself quite badly if you do make the wrong decision. Pretty minor consequences to the drastic, very career-ending consequences that could happen in a single run.
Goodness me. Wow. So yes, obviously massive respect for someone who's prepared to do that anyway. So again, digging into your decision making, at some point in your life, you made a decision, I'm going to get onto this thing called a skeleton and I'm going to throw myself down ice hills. How did that decision come about?
I was invited to come to a testing day. So I did athletics beforehand. So I was a runner, and we run at the start of our runs, and then we jump onto this sled and then slide down. So there is a running component to it. I had a strength in running before I started. So I thought maybe this could transition to me being good at this sport, but I had no idea if I would like it or be good at it or anything like that before I actually went and tried the sport. Yeah, that was probably the first decision, was to actually go, because I had to go to the US to try the sport for the first time. So big decision there to leave the country and try this completely unknown sport and this unknown life before I even knew what I was getting myself into. So that was probably the first big decision. And then throughout my time in the sport, because I've been involved in it since 2012 now, over 12 years.
Goodness.
So there's been I've failed, I've succeeded, I've had good races, I've had bad races. So there's just been so many decisions along the way, whether to quit, keep going, how to improve, what training I should do next. Yeah, it's just been a whole vast array of, some big, some small decisions to get to the point where I am now.
I'd love to unpack a little bit. So that decision, when you got invited to go to the US and try this sport out, when you made that decision, what were your drivers? What were the things that were underlying that said, I'm going to go for this?
The first one was the running component. So I thought, I'm a pretty fast runner, so I could be good at this. I could be good at this. The second thing was when I was younger, we really liked, when I say we, my family and I really liked going on snow trips. So snowboarding to Japan, because I'm half Japanese, we would go to Japan quite a bit. So I loved snow trips, and this is a Winter Olympic sport. So I knew I liked cold weather and the kind of the snow in that environment. The first thing was the running. The second thing was the cold weather environment that I already knew that I liked. And the third thing was probably, like I said, I did snowboarding. I also like skateboarding. So this kind of these adrenaline sports.
Yeah.
And I saw this sport and I thought this is 100% adrenaline. So pretty much, yeah, those three things combined to me saying to myself, A, I could enjoy this, and then B, I could be good at it as well.
Okay, so it's interesting to always unpack what's behind someone making, especially big life-changing decisions like going to try out. Because I guess when you went in to try out, the decision was, well, if I'm good at this, then I guess I'm going to give it a go. That had to be there for you. So perhaps just maybe talk me through a bit of a run and the decisions you're making, the micro decisions that you're making as you're going down the ice, basically. Just to give everyone who's listening, as well as me, a bit of a picture of what it's actually like going through your brain.
Yeah. So even off the top, we have to choose, we call it a groove, but it's a little track in the ice that we put our sled down into. And there's a right and a left one. So straight from the get-go, we have to decide which groove we want to put our sled into. And that gives us a different entrance into the first corner. Depending on which way the first corner goes, either right or left, the right or left groove is going to put us into that corner in a different way. So that's, even before we start, we have to make that decision. Usually we will make that decision in training. So we'll know in our minds which one we're going to choose before race day. But then, yeah, we have to run off the top. I'll jump on my sled. If I'm going straight into the first corner, there's no decision to make. I know what steer I have to do. But if I'm slightly offline, there's a decision there that I have to either kind of steer and risk making a mistake to try get the perfect line, or I'll just keep tracking where I am and maybe not be on the ideal line, but I can make it work. So that's what we have to decide going into every single corner is, am I at the right spot in this corner to get maximum velocity? Am I at the right point where I'm not going to crash and hurt myself as well? So if I'm slightly offline, I'll have to decide, do I try fix this now, or can I get through this corner and I'll try fix it for the next one?
And how do you know if you're offline? Because it's not like there's lines drawn on the track, right? And you don't have like computers going turn left, turn right.
We'll try different lines, so different entrances into these corners in training. So we'll know from just runs and runs and runs over the week and over the years, we have preferences. I've gone fastest and I've got the best downtime if I do this specific line down the track. So we have that idea in our heads and then we try to follow that as best as possible. But I'd say in my 12 years, I might have had one run where I've thought that was perfect. I can't get any better than that. So every single time we go down, every single corner, I would be slightly offline to where exactly I want to be. Yeah, that's the main decision we have to make is, do I steer now to try get that perfect entrance? But if I do steer, I'm going to risk either skidding the sled, which is going to make it slower, or I'm going to risk making another mistake trying to fix the problem, I guess.
In decision-making, for me, fundamentally, decision-making is about trade-offs. You've pointed perfectly to some trade-offs there. There's the trade-off of maybe I'm not on the perfect line, but doing nothing at least means I don't carry any risk of going wrong, versus I'm now trading off maybe some time in the speed through the corner. And so I could put some adjustments, some steering or whatever, but has the risk of that going wrong. So a classic example of a risk-benefit trade-off right there. I've got to ask you this because I'm fascinated. How do you steer? They don't have steering wheels, right?
No, so we steer with our shoulders and our knees. So we're essentially just putting input into the four corners of our sled and just essentially just bending it to the way we want it to go. If I want to go like left, if I want to steer slightly left, I'll dig my right shoulder in. So just the opposite. And it steers the sled to the way we want it to go.
I can hear as well that there's also some uncertainty as to how much input you put in and how much it steers it. Again, it's not as simple as I turn my steering wheel a little bit and the thing moves in a certain direction. And partly because I'm fascinated, how fast are you going?
Every track's different just because of the way the corners are shaped and how steep it is. We have a different top speed on every track. But the fastest I've ever gone is 141.3 kilometers an hour.
141 kilometers an hour on basically nothing. So when you said an adrenaline sport and you likened it to skateboarding, that's a bit faster than most people go on a skateboard, I imagine. So that's pretty crazy. Wow. Wow. Okay. I'm getting a picture of what it takes from a decision making point of view. When you're in the moment, you've got some decisions that you pre-make, which groove am I going to go in? And then as you're down the track, you're making that trade-off. One other thing I want to ask you, because this is a fascinating challenge in decision making. Often those very instantaneous decisions, sometimes we're making them unconsciously. We don't even notice we've done it, or we run out of time to make the decision. So we have to just make the decision anyway. You're in the corner. Once you're in the corner, you're in the corner. But also, I guess what it takes to be an Olympian, so at the absolute pinnacle of your sport, is very long-term decisions. Every morning you wake up, do I work out? Do I eat well? The training and all those things that the results don't show up there and then, they only show up over time. How does that work for you when you think about what it takes to have a long-term commitment into something like a sport at this level, where I imagine there's lots of other trade-offs? Oh, come on, Nick, let's go party. No, I'm on a training program, I'm on an eating program, whatever. How do you find yourself there in those decisions?
Yeah, there is a lot of long-term decision making, obviously. Yeah, I think being in sport and the sport for so long, you realize, yeah, the things you do now they might not show up. They might not eventuate in the next competition, but you'll benefit from it 4 years down the road. And I think the biggest instance of that for me was in 2018. So I missed out on those Winter Olympics, and
Right.
it was by a very small margin as well. I had to reflect and tell myself or ask myself, am I doing enough to get that qualifier? And the simple answer was no. It probably took me about 2 weeks after that season, that missed Olympic bid, of me reflecting. And I realized that I wasn't actually like investing in myself completely.
Right.
I was leaving this safety net. So a big decision I made after missing those Olympics was to give everything I had. And for me, I was always giving physically everything I had, but I decided to financially.
Right.
I had to buy more equipment. I had to spend more time overseas, which obviously cost more money. I hired a new coach. I decided I know sometimes for me, if I got a little injury, I'd be like, oh, I'll be all right in 2 weeks. But after that, I was like, no, I have to go to the physio straight away. So spend that money to fix it straight away. So there were so many decisions that came from that missed qualifying that I implemented over the next 4 years. And sometimes, yeah, if I had a bad race, I'd be like, well, what was the point in spending money on physio, spending money on getting scans, spending on money on equipment? But I had to trust myself. And then in 2022, so the 4 years later, I believe all those decisions I had made to invest in myself further and more really paid off. Yeah, sometimes it was very tough making those tough decisions, but yeah, I guess you just have to believe in yourself and believe and trust in the goals that you set yourself when you set them.
That's such a good example. So thank you for sharing that, because as humans, we're very bad at making long-term, short-term trade-offs. That's just the way our brains work. So we don't like the idea of decisions I'm making, like spending the money on the physio now. The only real benefit is in 3 years' time when I come to qualify again or whenever. So we're not good at that. And I can hear in your example, what's interesting is that you had an example of where you hadn't made some of the best decisions and you didn't qualify in 2018. And so you had an example for yourself of what it's like to make the other decisions. I think that can be very helpful for people, is to have almost a benchmark that says, okay, this is how it goes. Now I'm going to have it go a different way. So I'm going to make some different decisions from here on in, because how we see something as long-term as 3-4 years out or 10 years out, or many people, of course, are thinking about pensions and retirement. That might be 20-30 years away. Decisions today is very hard to make there. But a place we can look is, here's an example where maybe there's some different decisions I could have made and I know the outcome I got. And that's not the outcome I'm committed to. So what would it take for me to make different decisions as we go through? So really great to dig into the world of decision making when most people come to the clinic, because they're in the middle of some kind of decision making. And my opportunity, my commitment is, how can I diagnose what might be going on and perhaps provide some sort of prescription for something that can help going forward. So Nick, have you brought a decision to the clinic today?
Yeah, upcoming season starts in November. We've got the schedule out. There's a World Cup schedule. So we've got 2 different tiers of level of competition. So World Cup's the top. And then we've got a competition level underneath, which is North America's Cup, Europa Cup, and the Asian Cup. So we've got the schedule now. So my decisions now are which races I go to. And I base my decisions on each country it has a different cost of living. So how much is the accommodation going to be? How much is the food going to be? So mainly my decision making going forward would be which races to go to and the cost benefit of going to these races. Some of them I've got quite a lot of experience on, so I'd likely get a good result on that track.
Okay.
Some of them I don't have a lot of experience on, but there's an opportunity there to learn, but I might not get a good result. So am I willing to spend the money to possibly improve, but not get the result I'm after? So yeah, at the moment I'm trying to decide which races I go to. If I go to all the World Cup races, if I go to some of the lower level races, or if I play it safe, if I take risks. Yeah, that's what I'm battling with at the moment.
Got it. Oh, hopefully you're in the right place. That's the conversation that we can have. Let's just unpack that a little bit more. So obviously there's another Winter Olympics round the corner. Is it a run up to that for you? Or is it an end in itself? In other words, your success at, let's say, the World Cup events, if you participate in those. So just interested in kind of what's the bigger, slightly bigger picture, perhaps.
Yeah, like good results on World Cup could mean more funding for me.
Okay.
Which obviously is very handy because, we're severely underfunded at the moment. So there is that benefit of if I go to these races and even if I do well at one of them, I don't have to be consistent. If I do well at one of them, I could get more funding. Yeah, that is a big positive. This year is essentially just a lead up year to qualify for the Winter Olympics. So the aim this year is to figure out equipment, kind of get settled in and just try to improve as much as possible for that Olympic qualifying year. But I think the biggest thing for me is, like I said, if I can get a good result in one of these World Cup races, and it has to be the World Cup race, not the lower level races, I could get more funding.
Interesting. And just a slight side question, just because you mentioned it, and I'm always interested in the very big picture. So you say we're underfunded. Say a bit more about that. Is we our sport, we sport in general, we Australia? Yeah, what's your view there?
Skeleton in Australia is very underfunded. It's just not a very well-known sport, unfortunately. I think we're a very summer sport nation. So winter sport gets forgotten. Yeah, and then some of the other winter sports like snowboarding and skiing get a lot more funding. So yeah, I think it's just a very small niche kind of sport in Australia. So skeleton in Australia is very underfunded.
It's interesting. So again, just my minor tangent for a moment is if we look at the decision making for where sports funded from, let's say from government, for example, and that trade off of what sports are funded more or less than others, I think there's an interesting tension there between funding things that we know we can succeed at, because Australians love to, let's find some places where we know we can succeed, even if it might not be in our sporting DNA. Let's imagine that most Australians don't grow up dreaming of riding skeleton. Likely they dream of surfing or playing footy or something. So there's probably not that dimension to it. But everyone loves a good Australian hero, and winning against the odds is definitely what it is to be Australian. So I think so. It's just interesting to think of the tension as to where that funding shows up. But anyway, that's perhaps a day for another conversation with a different guest from the government around how we make decisions on how we fund which sport activities. Okay, so just to pick apart what you're grappling with, in decision making, we talk a lot about the context. So the context for this decision for you is less directly about qualifying for next Olympics. It's more about what you can learn. So what can we try out, different pieces of kit and techniques or whatever? What can we learn? So learning, yes, improving time. So that's improving performance, and the opportunity for a good result at the right level. So a World Cup result could generate some financial benefit for you. And it's always interesting listening to financial benefit, because one of the things that in decision making, we're often trading off things that are very tangible. Here's some dollars, that's very tangible, with very intangible things such as passion or reputation or self-fulfillment. And you spoke earlier about how dollars is helpful for you. I can spend it on the physio, I can have scans, I can buy more equipment. I'm interested in your reflection on this. When you say the opportunity to win more funding, what does funding mean to you?
We don't have any training facilities very specific to our sport in Australia, unfortunately. So the closest place, the closest venue is actually in South Korea. So I did want to, in our off season, I did want to go to South Korea this year and try to do a training camp, but I just simply couldn't afford it, unfortunately. Yep. And this training, it helps our starts. So the start when we're running off the top. So this is directly impacting the start. So by me not going to this training camp, I am sacrificing that I might have a good start when I come to racing next season. But it was just one of those things I had to decide, do I save my money for the actual season, or do I spend it going to this camp and trying to improve my start? And unfortunately, I had to just keep the money for the season upcoming. So these are the kind of things that I would spend the money on if I had extra funding. So that training camps, and also equipment. Sled parts are very expensive, unfortunately, because there's a monopoly on it. Yeah, it's not very
I
accessible.
imagine there's not many in the world either. So
there's not many of them. So yeah, I do want to test some new equipment.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very expensive and I have to pick and choose which bits of equipment I can test and I can acquire depending on how much money I have. Yeah. So these are the kind of things that I would spend the money on if I were able to obtain that result and get a bit of extra funding.
Great. So that's so perfect to see that relationship between the very tangible thing called the funding, but actually a more intangible outcome that provides, which is, let's say you could have gone to that training camp and improve your start performance. And so it's helpful for us to look at when we think of money, which often we think, yeah, we care about money in and of itself, but often as human beings, we don't really. We care about what it enables for us. And sometimes just looking to the what it enables for us allows us to make decisions that aren't necessarily just chasing the money. Really good example. So a way that we can help to frame decisions is to get really clear on our options. And I can hear you have quite distinct options. You have a certain number of competitions that are available to you, and at two levels. So the World Cup level and the sort of level below that. So that's probably a set of discrete options. And I imagine you probably have a fixed constraint, which is I've got this much money I could spend on some combination or other of those. What's the best combination that you're playing for? So it's fascinating because that kind of decision is the sort of thing that's made by venture capitalists, by commercial real estate companies, by investors all the time, a portfolio decision. What's the mix of things I can buy with my constraint called money that gives me the best outcome? Mostly us as not big corporates aren't making decisions like that all the time. We're making very isolated decisions. Should I do this or this? What's great about it as a portfolio is it allows you to compare things with each other. You could compare North America with Europe. And in the comparison, our brains are better at making comparison decisions than making absolute decisions. One thing I would say straight away to anyone in your situation is firstly, just get clear on what all those options are. And then you might look at what are some combinations and permutations that are realistic for you. So you might, because some of them dates might not work, locations might not work, you might not have visas or whatever. There might be some other constraints, another factor in decision making that prevent you from doing optimum. And obviously there's a financial constraint as well. So there's an opportunity cost as well, which is more time I spend in training, etc., is not allowing me to do maybe other things that might help fund my training. Is that the case?
Exactly right. Yeah. I know some athletes will have jobs where they can work remotely.
Right.
So they are fortunate like that. But yeah, unfortunately, it's just the kind of work I've done over the years. I've had to take the time off. I just can't, there's no way to generate, like you said, generate income while I'm training and competing.
Yeah. So one of the things I talk a lot about is having a decision process before you jump into the decision. It sounds like you got that already because you've made these sort of decisions in the past. It sounds to me like you're reasonably settled with how. One of the things that people often forget, I don't know if this is the case for you, is decisions often impact other people. So we might look at a decision for ourselves and go, do I do X or Y? And want to think that through for ourselves without realizing that the result of that decision might impact on others. So I'd call those stakeholders of a decision, where people that get impacted by whatever decisions you make. So is that something that's a consideration for you? And who might the stakeholders be for you in, let's say, this decision as which competitions to enter next year?
Yeah, I think the main one would be my partner, Bonnie. Obviously, being away for these competitions means I'm outside of Australia. Depending on which ones I go to, how long I go for, yeah, I'll be away from her for a long period of time. So I think she's probably the main one and impact on my decision.
Are there times that she might come with you? So if you think about Bonnie as a stakeholder and imagine what value she has or impacts she has from your decisions, it's always interesting to explore what that could look like. So it might be, oh, cool, I get to travel to a cool place with Nick and hang out. And so I get some benefit of him competing. Or just another, I get the benefit of him competing and improving his performance because I get to basically skite about how awesome my boyfriend, the Olympian, is. There's other dimensions of why a stakeholder might see some value or impact in the decision. So is that the case? Can you imagine that?
I think so. I think just because of how many countries we go to and these interesting places, like it would be interesting for her to come and, I guess, watch and be around it. But obviously she has to decide whether she can take time off work or she's able to leave and all these other things. I guess that'd be a big decision for her as well, just coming over and witnessing and just being around it.
I always like to explore stakeholders a bit more broadly than that. One might imagine as Olympian, there's a fan base. There are people that, are committed to your success. let's say your family, for example, or other people, your friends, would you say they're stakeholders in this kind of decision as well, in terms of how the decision impacts upon them?
Yeah, I think definitely family. My brother and mum are actually going to come to my first race this upcoming season. So me going to that World Cup, it's in South Korea.
Right.
So me deciding to go to that first World Cup has impacted them. Yeah, because they're going to come and watch. And I guess when you were speaking about it, I do have a sponsor. So me going out to these races and being able to represent them also would impact them as well. And they would probably want me to be competing at the highest level. So the World Cup races probably has a bigger bearing on them rather than me going to the lower level races as well. Yeah, I guess that's the impact it would have.
Cool. Great. And I also know from a separate conversation, one of the things you do back here in Australia is talk at schools and so on. So I imagine the children at schools who come and see this Olympian coming to speak to them, they want to hear the cool stories that you had at the World Cup here or the so-and-so there. Sometimes the challenge is always not to stretch too far and go, yes, the entire planet is the stakeholder of your decision as to which competition to enter. But I'm just interested in, we find it helpful as humans to get the world of the decision that we're making. So would you imagine them? You imagine the stories you might have to tell them? Does that provide value to them?
Yeah, now that you say it, I think it's more valuable to these kids that I've spoken to. I guess it's more relatable to them that I am still currently competing rather than hearing from someone who that was their past life.
Right.
And aren't competing anymore. So the things I'm telling these kids when I go visit them are still very relevant to me. So I'm putting these things into practice, like mindset and not giving up and kind of pushing on and training hard. I'm still putting these things into place that I've talked to them about, so that I guess they can see that in practice in real life, like at the moment. So I get, now that you've mentioned it, it probably is more valuable to them and they can take more out of it, that I am not just telling them to do these things, but I'm actually doing it myself. Yeah, I think, you're right. It probably is more valuable to them. And I guess probably cooler to some of them as well that I'm still competing.
And it's interesting because things like coolness as a value, it's, as humans, we're, especially people like me, we don't talk about the fact that coolness matters. It does matter to people, and not acknowledging it in a decision sometimes can have not the consequences we want from a decision. So it's useful just to be in touch with that and go, oh yeah, there's something about that goes with it, which might relate to locations as much as it relates to performance and so on. So I think we're getting towards the end of our sessions. Perhaps I can just sum up a few things I've heard and see if this helps provide you with a little more clarity towards your decision as where you're going to compete. So firstly, we talked about stakeholders, and I would always say to anyone, just think through, even if actually it boils back down to just you or your immediate family or relationship. And then I would always encourage people to have a conversation with those people. Look, I'm facing this decision. It matters to me how the decision affects you. Just love to know how it affects you. Because often we're surprised when someone says, actually, I know it's your partner. Actually, I know it's a long time away. But frankly, while you're away, I'm dining out on the fact that you're competing, or I'm hanging out on the TV watching you. So sometimes there's things that we learn about what matters to other people that we don't know until we engage them. So that's one thing I'd say. Who are your stakeholders, and have a conversation with them. The other thing I think is what you do really well, so it's as much for anybody listening to this, is understanding the different why, the different, what I'd call outcomes, value of the decisions that you're making, the opportunity to generate more funding that will give you a bigger picture to support you in your performance. So that's the sort of very tangible outcome, but thinking of it through what the money means to you. And then the intangible outcomes, your own confidence in, perhaps I would imagine, competing in a variety of locations versus just one. There's more confidence from that because I get to try different things out. There's the value of testing. So I get more repetitive chance to try things out and see how that goes, perform. And then there's the value of the performance in itself. In other words, knowing yourself as dropping your times, increasing your speed and performance and so on, which sets you up for that longer game. Even though it's not qualifying now, it sets you up for a qualifying year. So I can see that if we can think about stakeholders and we can trade off, really be clear on what tangible and intangible value looks like, we can drive our decisions that way. And then finally, what you're making is what I call a portfolio decision. Which of the many I could do against the constraint? So I'd say get clear on your constraints. I think that's probably pretty obvious to you how much budget you've got and how much time you've got. And then inside those constraints, maybe look at some combinations and permutations, and then look at those as a set against the value. Okay, yeah, if I did these three, how does that stack up here? And I think your example you mentioned earlier, your sponsor as a stakeholder, is a great place to look and ask them questions, because what matters to them, as you say, is visibility at the World Cup level. And they might say, we're gunning for a big showing at this particular activity, so that might guide you in one direction. How does all that sound?
Yeah, hearing about like the stakeholders, and then I realized like in this moment, sometimes as athletes, we're so very selfish in like the kind of path that we take. And it's always about, what am I doing? What do I need to do? Where do I need to go? But we definitely forget sometimes that what we do affects the people around us as well. So I think definitely I need to step back and ask and look at these people, like, me going to this, does that affect you in any way, like positive or negative? And just ask, all the stakeholders around me. So I think that's definitely one thing I'm going to do. And I'm going to have to try to be more aware of that moving forward. And it's a very good point. It opened my eyes in that moment there. And then, the one about, you said about going to different races in different locations and that increasing my confidence. That's a very good point. And that definitely does happen. I'd say if we go to more tracks, our skill range will improve further. So the vast array of tracks we go to, I'd say our improvement curve is quicker and faster. Right. So that is definitely something I'm going to need to consider. And sometimes, like, we do forget that. Sometimes we think, if I just stay in this location, it's going to be cheap and I'm going to be able to slide at this place for the whole time. But again, missing out on that improvement aspect of it. So definitely something I'll have to consider. And then, just like you said, that portfolio, I'll have to pick and choose which races are going to benefit which areas of competition. I guess my life and the funding moving forward. So very good points that I'll have to go home and consider pretty hard.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Good luck with the training program and those decisions. And would love to hear from you again when we see how it's going.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I'll let you know when I've made some of these decisions, and if anything, if I change anything because of the things that I've thought about from today.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
So how great and how fortunate are we to hear from a bona fide Olympian at the top of his game in a sport that maybe some of us never have heard of, and realize the trade-offs of danger, risks, and benefits. And fascinating to hear how an Olympian's brain works in their own decision-making, those very immediate decisions. Do I adjust before I go into the corner or not? And the very long-term decisions. Do I go on this course of physiotherapy? Do I buy this new equipment? And that challenge of really balancing short and long term. So it's fascinating to hear that, how that looks in practice for a real person. And I think the other thing I just want to point to is common, and great to hear Nick seeing that, is we often forget other stakeholders in our decision processes. And sometimes we need that as human beings. Sometimes we just need to focus on ourselves, but actually what we do always has impacts elsewhere. And in fact, we can get a lot of insight just by having a conversation with, how may this decision affect you? Good lesson for all of us. Let's keep thinking about those stakeholders in our decisions, and let's take the lesson from the Olympian. It's the long game that we're playing in life, and sometimes we make some of those short-term trade-offs, and that's good for us, because when we look back on ourselves, we go, thank you, past self. See you at the next episode.